Tom, to start off, can you tell us about your background? Where are you from? Where did you go to school?
Sure. I'm Tom Kinsella. I am born and raised in Rochester, New York. Went to college in the middle of Pennsylvania, Bucknell University. Got my PhD in 18th century English literature at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I came to Stockton in 1989 to teach literature, my first full-time job.
Okay. And how did you first learn about the Alliance Colony?
Around 2011, I became very interested in public history, South Jersey local history, and Stockton opened something called the South Jersey Culture and History Center. I became its first director, and the interests of the South Jersey Culture and History Center were almost anything local history-wise from Burlington and Ocean counties south. So I learned a lot about the Pine Barrens, about Atlantic City, about Cape May, about Salem County. At one point, a good friend, a board member on the South Jersey Culture and History Center, Mark Dimitrov, said, "Hey, you got to come meet this guy I know in Vineland. His name is Jay Greenblatt, and he's got a story for you." So I drove over to Vineland and met Jay Greenblatt, who told me the story of the Alliance Colony for the first time. I'd never heard about this first Jewish farming community in New Jersey. He took us out to the cemetery, opened up the chapel. We took a look around, and I was just wowed. I thought, that's a fabulous story, and people should know it better. So I came back to Stockton, still running the South Jersey Culture and History Center and still teaching mostly. I had begun a little editing project with students, and I said, I found this book that's quite rare that talks about the Alliance Colony. It's called Migdal Zophim from 1889, 7 years after the start of the colony. Never been republished. Let's see whether we can republish this. It was a very old text with very small print. It was difficult to get a hold of a copy, but we did. We had to type the entire text back in, and we added material from the Jewish Exponent, which is the weekly Jewish newspaper of Philadelphia from around 1898 to 1910. We enhanced Migdal Zophim, telling the story about the Alliance Colony and how it grew, and Rosenhain Colony and Carmel, which are sister colonies. So I was already very interested in Alliance when I met Jay Greenblatt and Jay Einstein again and expressed my deepening interest in the history and thought maybe we could do some work together. As it turns out, Jay Einstein was good friends with Sharon Shulman, who was running the Hughes Center at Stockton, and he got a meeting with President Sotkamp about the possibility of running some sort of a center. They had some discussions. One of the deans said, "Hey, Tom Kinsella's been talking about this Alliance thing too. Maybe we should bring him in." And that, over time, developed in the Alliance Heritage Center, which really had its opening in around November of 2019.
Okay. And so when you think of what you use to describe the Alliance Heritage Center, when people ask what it is, what do you usually say?
I usually say that the goals of the Alliance Heritage Center are to preserve the history and tell the stories of the Alliance community. Alliance grew into three small towns, Brotmanville to the north, Alliance, and then Norma. They really all sprang from the Alliance colony. The depth of the project is reaching out to community members, descendants, asking them what they remember. We're several generations away from that founding generation in 1882, but they still have stories about their grandparents or they themselves as younger folk visiting Alliance. We are trying to gather as much history and memory about this community from a group that has dispersed widely across the United States. It's an interesting project.
Okay. And as you tell these stories, do you see any connections to maybe your own family history and immigration?
The Kinsella side of my family are Irish immigrants, potato famine style. My mother's side of the family go back to Taylors and Bakers, go back to the Mayflower stuff. It's not immigration that is a touchstone so much for me, but as a child, and to this day, my family has cottages up in Ontario in Canada. And my first memories of that are as a very rural place, plowing with horses, driving over wooden bridges, playing in forests. Early Alliance with its outhouses, with its farming, with its rural roots, makes sense to me. My mother taught me, I did not learn well, taught me how to sew on a treadle sewing machine, a Singer sewing machine. So when I'm reading that the colonists were given treadle sewing machines to sew, it makes sense to me.
Okay. What do you think are the most rewarding parts about sharing this history and engaging with the community?
I like the fact that this is a small and a large project. We're focused on one town, really. What grew out of the Alliance colony. There is a bigger picture of immigration in South Jersey about numerous other Jewish immigrant colonies in South Jersey that we do research and preserve history for. But I like the idea that we're really doing a very deep dive into Norma, Alliance, and Brotmanville to see how much of a bygone era we can discover.
Okay. Students are very involved in bringing this history of the Alliance Colony to the community, especially working with the physical archives. Can you talk a little bit more about student involvement?
Sure. I've been working with students in local history since before 2011, when I started the South Jersey Culture and History Center. That student involvement, which might be having them develop exhibitions that are placed in library cases or often online exhibitions, bleeds over into the work that we first started to do with Alliance. We were and continue to publish books related to or republish books related to Alliance, and the students regularly help edit, design, do the layout of those texts. We have students that have been working as Alliance Heritage Center interns, helping us to digitize, essentially catalog materials that have been donated by community members. We have some wide-ranging projects that students help in, and depending on how interested and skillful they are, they get to do a lot of different things. The piece that I haven't discussed yet is our relationship with Stockton Special Collections. We have been developing at Stockton since around 2010, from the ground up, collections related to South Jersey widely. Alliance fits right into that. When we are donated material by community, have materials donated by community members, they're preserved not in the Alliance Heritage Center. They're preserved in special collections, which essentially works hand in glove with the Alliance Heritage Center. We've got a lot of material from Alliance. We have a lot of material from other Jewish farming communities and other Jewish communities in South Jersey that is preserved in special collections. The Alliance interns work with this material in a wide range of ways.
Okay. And speaking about the publications, so since the first publication that had to do with Alliance, can you talk about some of the other books that you've published?
We have some excellent titles. Migdal Zophim is a favorite of mine. The author of Migdal Zophim, Moses Klein, was a not terribly wealthy Philadelphian, came from Hungary, I believe, as an immigrant, who recognized the need to help his Jewish brethren and other immigrant brethren. And while he didn't have deep pockets, he had stamina and determination and worked in very useful ways with the incoming immigrant populations. He's a hero of mine. I really like Moses Klein. So that book was a pleasure to work on and learn about. Bluma Bayek, Rappaport Permel is her full name, wrote a biography of her, an autobiography of her life that she published in 1981. Bluma was born in 1888, very early at Alliance to Moses and Annette Bayek. And her memoir is a fabulous, provides a fabulous description of the childhood, of her childhood growing up in Alliance. I mean, you get a really good idea of what it was like in that first generation growing up. She then went to Philadelphia, became a nurse, ran nursing homes. She's a very influential, very intriguing woman, lived to be 109, I believe. Her memoir was out of print. Her family, her relatives, her granddaughter in particular, Michelle Rappaport, made a connection with the Alliance Heritage Center and has allowed us to republish that memoir. It's an important book if you want to read about Alliance and get a good contemporary view of what it was like from someone who was there. Very proud of that. Ruth Weinstein wrote a memoir. She spent her childhood in Philadelphia, but visiting her grandparents in Alliance. And Ruth wrote this wonderful coming-of-age memoir about being a summertime kid at Alliance during the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s. She's a poet, Ruth is, and she intersperses in her memoir not only her poetry and her poetic sensibility of her memories of Alliance, but she circles it back to the life she's been leading with her husband, Joe, for the last 40, 50 years, living in the Ozarks on 40 acres, farming pretty much like her great-grandparents farmed at Alliance. She sort of turned that circle. That's an interesting book. We continue to look for publishable material on Alliance, so if you're out there and you've got anything, you might want to contact me.
And speaking of narratives of the colony, besides the ones that you mentioned, do any other anecdotes stand out that I know, for instance, I always think of Bluma and the Blizzard, and that's something that you relay to when we have the school tours.
There's a lot of good anecdotes. Harry Levin, who was a lawyer, an attorney, and a judge in the middle of the last century at Alliance, tells a story about, I think, the Levin brothers kidnapping one of the local farmers' goats, I believe, and bringing it up to the top of the Brotmanville sewing sewing building, and putting it on the roof. And the farmer was upset, running around town. Where's my goat? Where's my goat? And it was just bleeding on top of this building. I just find that funny. There are lots of good anecdotes about the Stavitsky brothers, who lived most of their lives as very rural, almost piney community members, well loved. The Stavitsky brothers are very interesting to read about. You're right. That story in Bluma's A Farmer's Daughter memoir talks about I think an 1895 blizzard, a horrific blizzard, a 3-day blizzard. The family is in the house. Bluma's a young girl, 7 or 8, and they're running out of coal. And they're going to have a real problem because it's deeply cold, and they're going to have to start burning furniture, and that's an upsetting thing. And even that might not last them through. And there's this wonderful community ending where Annette, Bluma's mother, is looking out frozen windows, scraping at them, saying, "I see someone out there, Moses. I see someone coming to us." He's like, "It can't be. The blizzard's terrible still." And 2 of their friends had heroically shoveled a mile with sacks of coal on their back because they knew that they were running out of coal, and saved the day. That's just, it's a great story, but it's a real community story. That's what Alliance was like. They'd go out of their way to help one another.
And speaking of stories, can you talk a little bit about the recent oral history project?
We've got a couple of big projects that we were working on. Patty Chapin, who is the Rudnick Fellow, she's been the Rudnick Fellow since April 2022, and I can't express how significant an impact she has made on our Alliance project. A lot of really good things wouldn't have happened if Patty Chapin hadn't been poking me in the back saying, "We should do this, let's do this, I'm going to do this." Patty got a grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, I believe, that gave us some funding to work with students and Patty to bring in community members to do oral histories, to hear what their memories of Alliance or their family stories of people who were in Alliance, to record and preserve those stories. That's what I'm doing right now as part of this project, is recording my small interaction with Alliance. The grant only extends so far, but one of the things that we have realized is that we should be doing a lot more of this recording of oral history. So again, those of you out there who might happen to see this, if you want to talk about your mother or your father, your own experiences, your grandparents' memories, the old family stories, please contact us. We can bring you into Stockton, and we can sometimes come to you. We can always do this via Zoom. It's the 21st century. Let's go digital.
And speaking of digital, I hear there's a recent digital history museum about Alliance.
Patty Chapin again. We have a lot of archival materials, not so many artifacts. We don't have plows in the back room, but a lot of papers and photographs and film and audio by Alliance community members that we have preserved in special collections. Patty said we need to have a digital museum. We've got all of this material that we have either digitized or can digitize. Let's tell the story that way. That reminds me of a very early interaction that I had with Jay Greenblatt. That first meeting with Jay, when he took me out to the chapel and was unfolding the story of Alliance, he shows me the chapel, which has had a display in it, a historical display, since 1982. He showed me the chapel and said, "Hey, is this the type of building that Stockton University might want to help maintain, maybe take over the way you're taking over the Showboat in Atlantic City or in Woodbine. And I smiled because I knew at that point that the Showboat project was going down in flames. And I said, no, I think Stockton's probably less interested in bricks and mortars at this point. But frankly, we could do a digital museum. We'd have to have materials. We'd have to take some time to learn about those materials. We'd have to put this all together. And it's almost free. That's what Patty Chapin returned to and put together. We've got a lovely digital museum, which we continue to improve online at allianceheritagecenter.com. And if you haven't taken a look at it, I think you'll like it. I wish you would. That's one digital project we have. We have gotten into the bricks and mortars area, and in a sense, again, Patty Chapin thought, why wouldn't we reach out to the Mellon Foundation and see whether they'd give us a grant? Maybe we can renovate the historic display in the chapel. We did get a grant. We have been renovating the chapel exhibition, and next fall you can expect October or November or September of 2025, we'll have a grand reopening of the chapel. You're all invited. You'll hear about it soon enough. We're working on the final details now. But it's going to be a really interesting reworking, an enhancement of the already fine historic presentation in the chapel.
And as you envision the future of the Alliance Heritage Center, what do you see?
There's a crux that we're going to have to deal with at some point. I'm very interested in the fact that we're doing a very deep dive, as deep as we can, into a small local community. At some point, we might have tapped as much of that as we can. The next question would then be, what does that deep dive into a small rural community that started out as a Jewish farming colony, how does that speak to wider issues, at least in the local area or the South Jersey area or the American story? I hope and I fully expect the Alliance Heritage Center, which has received fine community support. I'm very grateful for the community support that we've received. Will continue working with students on campus, presenting opportunities for them to do lots of project-based learning, lots of research, to be introduced to the meaningful life stories of immigrants that have come to South Jersey. I think in the future, the Alliance Heritage Center will start to speak to that wider immigration, those wider immigration stories, because certainly South Jersey, if not all of New Jersey, has a many-threaded immigration story. There's lots of different immigrant waves that have come and mixed and made South Jersey what it is today.
And when you think of interactions you've either had with students or community members, or even the historical community, is there anything that stands out, or things that you're most proud of when you look back at all of these community events and exhibits?
Yes, I think I'm most proud of preserving the historical documents. I don't know how these oral interviews that we've been doing and will continue to do are going to get used in 18 years or 87 years. I don't know how all of the photographs and documentation and various deeds and letters that we have related to Alliance might be used as documentary pieces, as podcast material, as research material for books. But I trust they will be used for interesting things, that Stockton students and community members will use them in intriguing and exciting ways that I'm not even thinking about. I trust that'll happen, but it can only happen if we preserve the material, which we are doing. So it's the preservation I think I'm most proud of.
And I think you've already touched on this a little bit, but when you think about the history of Alliance and also the other Jewish agricultural communities in southern New Jersey, what overall lessons resonate with you?
My good friend Mark Dimitrov has thought an awful lot about this, and he'd have more to say about the interconnectedness of the various waves of immigrants, the Germans, the Italians, the Jews, as they came with the railroads across South Jersey. I'm interested in the fact that as rural as South Jersey has been and remains to be, it's very close to one of the largest metropolitan areas in America, in Philadelphia, and pretty darn close to the largest one, New York. That connection between the immigrants could find safe haven in our area of South Jersey, but their children could go to the big city. There's a fascinating dynamic there. I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in the way community members on the ground before the immigrant waves come in interact with the immigrants, and specifically in Alliance's story, how the New York City, the Philadelphia, frankly, the London and the French philanthropists helped. These were not governmental operations. These were philanthropists stepping up and spending staggering sums of money to help their brethren in need. It resonates.
Great. Those are all the questions I had prepared. Did you have any closing thoughts before we wrapped up?
I'm going to end with my official title as the Elizabeth and Samuel Levin Director of the Alliance Heritage Center. I have a pretty interesting job at Stockton, and I've been able to work with a lot of talented colleagues, community members, and especially students. I've had some very interesting jobs and projects that I've worked on through my 35-odd years here at Stockton, but this is clearly the most interesting and engaging. I'm repeating myself, but the community depth of Alliance is well worth preserving and telling others about. So that's what we're trying to do.